Welcome to FIT's 15th Annual Sustainable Business and Design Conference. It's been a tough year for everybody. It's been an interesting year, but I think sustainability is still at the core of a conversation that needs to happen, and change still needs to happen and move along. And there's so much that I think FIT's audience, my audience, would like to learn about all your platforms you're doing, your sustainability goals, how COVID has affected some of the business practices, the changes you've seen. So we've got quite a lot of questions to ask, and it's going to change and move in different ways as these Zoom things do. And I think I want to start with Ayesha and just understand what your passion getting involved in the sustainability movement and where that passion came from. What was your kind of light bulb aha moment, thinking I'm going to devote my future career to doing this? Oh, you're on mute, Ayesha.
Well, thank you, everyone. Yes, you'd think, 1 year after Zoom, we'd know how to mute and unmute, but here we go. So, hi, everyone. I'm Ayesha. I am so happy to be here with Whitney and Brittany and you. I would say, a lot of my passion when it comes to sustainability and fashion comes from my heritage. I am Pakistani American. I grew up in Karachi and with family that ran clothing factories. And I think early on just had this understanding of how here's an industry that can often be the first way for women with, not more than a primary school education to be lifted out of poverty. But with a lot of the FIT students listening in, I think it was really grad school while I was getting my degree in public policy that I started to see this dichotomy between the language of sustainability and how it was being taught, but how the generation of fashion's most essential workers, the Black and brown women that bring our fashion to life, were being left out of this conversation. And that's really why Remake is here. It's to bridge those connections, is for us to really know that there is no sustainability without gender justice and human rights. So that's how I got going.
Yes, yeah, I want to actually come back onto that at some point. The human rights element to all of this, I think, is so imperative to discuss. Whitney, you're a journalist and editor on sustainability at core, and it's something, a passion that you believe in and you write about very dearly. And what was your passion like? What made you journalism go into sustainability? It's such a certain topic of focus. What made you go in that direction?
Yeah, so I actually got my start writing about the intersections between fashion and religion, which was just something that I was interested in because I didn't see it being done all that much in the world. And I still do some of that and have sort of built a beat around that. But I started writing I was really starting to think about it at the end of 2012 and started writing publicly about fashion in 2013. And then right away, Rana Plaza happened. And I'm sure most listeners are probably familiar, but this was, the most casualties ever in a garment industry sort of factory incident. And for me, part of the interest in religion and in talking about that is it shapes our ethics and it shapes our world and what we think of as right and wrong. Well, I'm still really interested in that, and I still value that discussion. The sort of human rights element, as Ayesha was bringing up, was so clear in this factory tragedy. And from there, it became really clear, like, no matter what people think about what or who God is or how the world works, like, we should all be able to agree, like, no one should die to make a t-shirt. And once you start looking at the human rights side of things, which is, that was sort of my entryway, you can't actually separate people from the places and the land in which they live and the air and the water. And so the more I started paying attention to the human rights side of things, the more I also started to care about the sort of environmental side of things, if we want to treat that as separate from the human rights, which I would argue it's not actually that separate, but
yes,
that's sort of how it started for me.
Yes. And Brittany, you have the Sustainable Fashion Forum. What was your pivotal switch to do this for you?
Yeah, I wasn't trying to start a conference. I wasn't trying to start a platform. I wasn't trying to do anything that I'm doing right now. None of it. My background is in marketing.
Yes.
And I was helping designers and retailers here in the Portland area with their social media marketing, email marketing, digital marketing, influencer marketing, all the marketing. And I was heavily involved in the fashion industry here in Portland. And I was asked to be a judge at a fashion show that was centered on sustainability. Mm-hmm. And so I went, and I had no idea that the industry that I love so much was so detrimental to both people and planet. Mm-hmm. I had no idea. And I was actually really it really hurt my heart, actually. Mm-hmm. I love fashion so much, and I had no idea. So I went home, and I did what a lot of people do, is I Googled and I tried to figure out what was going on. And from my Google search, I was even more confused, and I felt like the information was contradictory, and like I didn't know what was going on really. And so I keep trying to think back to why I decided to create an event about something that I knew nothing about. I think honestly, I was being lazy, and I figured that, you know, if I could people that knew about sustainability, that called themselves sustainable designers, I could learn from them. And so it'd be easier than me trying to like figure out this information on my own. And so I did that. And so I figured, well, maybe other people are interested in this. So I put it out into the world, and the first event, 150 people came to it.
Amazing.
And, yeah, well, I didn't realize at the time, when you host an event, that you don't get to just sit there and listen, like, and you're like running around doing all the things. So I learned absolutely nothing at the first event. That was the whole point of me wanting to do this. I learned nothing. But what I realized was how much I love bringing people together and community. And I guess now people, because I've been in the industry, for a while now, and I've learned a lot and have had lots of conversations with people are starting to put me up as an expert. And I still feel like the outsider in this space, that, I still feel like that, even though I have all this information. But what I really enjoy is not necessarily being the one who's talking or being the one who's telling people what's what. I really enjoy being that connector between people who have the information, who have the thoughts and have the ideas, and the people who want to learn and want to know more about it. So from the conference, it wasn't until I think the second year, and Whitney has been in all of them, which is amazing. But it wasn't until the second year that I realized, that I wanted to do this, and I wanted to actually do more than just, because at first it was just sort of like a side thing that I was doing. And I really realized how much I love community. I love, the people, but then I learned how much, sorry, they're like vacuuming in the hall now. Hope you can't hear that. They just, okay. But anyways, yeah, I realized how much I love all these things. And then I realized how much I love sustainability. I had no idea that I had this passion, or that I cared so much about it, until I got into it and I realized how layered it is. And I realized like how much there is to this conversation, and all the different points and topics. So yeah, it was accidental. I didn't mean to. I thought that I was going to be, I called myself starting an agency, a marketing agency, and it was just me though. But that was what I was going to do. And then somehow I ended up in this space, and I really, really, really enjoyed. Okay, I'm gonna go now. I don't know if you can hear that. It's so loud. Yeah.
That's okay. I can ask another question to one of the other guys as well whilst they're finishing that section. That might be a good idea. I want to ask Ayesha, with your business and being in Karachi, and what's in the sweatshops, what's been the most alarming thing that you feel that you've seen? Because I think a lot of times when you get a passion to do something, like Brittany has saying that and Whitney, if you experience something, it shows you the empathy, and it, I think, is the driving force to try and make changes when you've had actually a connection to something. Often it's an emotional connection to something as well. So I'd love to hear what you feel has been the most kind of shocking thing that you've seen with all of this.
As Whitney and Brittany were talking, I was like, yes, absolutely agree to everything they're saying. I think first it's important, what Whitney was saying around, you can't really have human rights without sustainability, but the fact that these two conversations are so fractured, often we talked about environmental issues or human rights issues, but the truth is that the two are intrinsically linked. And for myself, as someone who spent most of my career inside factories, inside dye houses, really understanding and seeing the underbelly of the
Yes.
industry that you often don't see on the glitz and glamour of the runway, you realize how climate justice and gender justice are just intrinsically linked and connected to fashion systems, which is why I'm so excited that Whitney's now doing more of a climate beat as well. And I'd say often we talk about, well, what are the most shocking, horrific, terrible things in the industry? And I could certainly tell you all of those, but for us at Remake, we really are, as a nonprofit, a brand of hope and inspiration. Much like Brittany, I love fashion. I remember being, 5-year-old little girl looking up at my grandmother in her beautiful pashmina shawl with her earrings glinting. And I was just in love. Like, this is an industry that I love very much, regardless of all of its bad behavior. And so I think one of the untold stories within the industry is also that the makers of our clothes, regardless of how oppressive the systems that have been set up to keep her trapped in a cycle of poverty, how she's really a feminist in her own right, like fighting for her rights and her dignity, especially in the pandemic. We have seen the inequities of the industry crack wide open, and women, whether in downtown LA, in Hawassa in Ethiopia, whether in Myanmar, Cambodia, have been out there protesting for what's legally owed to them from a wage standpoint, from a severance standpoint. And so she really is a hero, when it comes to the story of sustainability. But what have I seen as someone who's both been on the inside of the industry, making the case for sustainability, who worked in the public sector within the UN system to bring government and unions to the table, and now within Remake, more on an advocacy front. This is an industry that still, here we are in 2021, has modern day slavery. There's no other way to put it, not just in terms of the poverty wages that we pay, but in terms of the deplorable conditions. I remember being in Jordan where workers had their passports taken away from them and were working, inhumane conditions and having salary docked for dorm conditions that were really not livable. But I think, much like Whitney, for those of us who've been doing this work for a long time, there was the work we did before Rana Plaza and the work we did after. And the fact that it took, over 1,100 people to die in a factory collapse, and for days to pull out the rubbish of bodies for us to say, okay, fashion, this constant growth, pumping out product that then ends up in a landfill anyway, at the cost of human dignity, is not working, was really this moving point of, we need a movement. We need a movement of people that are asking for better. And that really is Remake's founding story of how can we, in actionable ways, truly make this industry that we all love so very much be more a force for good.
Yes. Do you see a lot of the brands have been more responsive in light of the Rana Plaza, in light of COVID, maybe being more empathetic and seeing, there's obviously low minimum wage people, there's people working in the sweatshops that need that income. And do you see that there's been kind of more a better shift towards a safer workspace?
So, I never think of brands as monolithic, right? They're not all the same. And I'm sure Brittany would agree, right? So within Remake, one of the tranches of our work is around transparency, because it's so difficult for an ordinary person, for an everyday citizen, to have a look at all the marketing, the greenwashing, the PR, the lying that comes at you to say, well, what is truly a sustainable product? And so we've taken a stab at it. It's not perfect, but it's to say, okay, of all the information that's publicly available, who are the brands that are better? Who are the brands that are worse? And so on our platform, remake.world, you can come and see, and we have a hard look. Like, these are the rock stars. These are, the serial offenders that tell pretty stories that don't add up. And, these are the brands that really are the bottom feeders and the predators. And I'd say, there are a few core truths embedded in that. One is, when I was really looking at a lot of these industrial disasters, because, Rana Plaza wasn't just a moment in time. We had Ali Enterprise, and we had the Tazreen factory fire, but you had a lot of fast fashion. And the winners in the pandemic have really been the ultra fast fashion brands, right? The Boohoo's and the Misguideds of the world. And so if you're bringing product very quickly at rock bottom prices, cheaper than your favorite beverage, then know that there's exploitation baked in the price. And it's very difficult to get to that price point without paying workers fairly. So I'd say, of the ultra fast fashion brands, because of how quickly we're moving product, because of delivery schedules that are very punishing, because of the price that we pay, it's where you see some of the most egregious conditions. And we've seen that during the pandemic, whether we think about, the COVID hotspots with the women making Fashion Nova in Los Angeles, to the workers in Leicester, UK making Boohoo, to workers around the world who are demanding their wages. I do think there's a misnomer there that somehow if it's a luxury product or if we're paying more, that the women who are making the product are any better off. You can go into a factory and see a high-end product and a mid-market product side by side. So, have brands learn their lesson from Rana Plaza? We'll see. A lot of the building safety, the accord is set to expire next month. And, how many brands are going to step up? It's also important to know that there were free riders in that process. It was a lot of European brands who signed up to the accord, which is a binding agreement to work with unions to improve building safety. But other brands who simply didn't do that. And it's the same in the pandemic. Through our campaigning, we got some brands to honor their contracts. We are in conversation with some brands to not forget fashion's most essential workers. There are other brands who won't engage at all. So I'd say it's a mixed bag, but putting the onus on brands from a reputational standpoint or from a, goodness of their heart standpoint, I think in some ways is the wrong question, which is why we are increasingly calling for more regulation. There's no way for us to level this playing field or really have a truly sustainable industry if we don't regulate.
Yes. No, you have to have the transparency and have people accountable for that as well.
Right.
Brittany, what to you is a sustainable product? Like what makes it sustainable, do you think, a brand?
So I think sometimes it can be a little tricky because I like to think of sustainability as like an onion, and there are like so many different layers to it. And, what one person thinks is sustainable or is like a good solution, you could find holes in that, and other people, don't think the same. So I think for me, when I'm thinking about brands who are sustainable or who are, doing ethical practices within their business model, that they're thinking about both people and planet, and they're doing what they can, like, considering, their financials, their ability or whatever, they're doing what they can to make the best product that they can, that is both, is treating their workers well, and they're being paid, and, and they're not working in a factory or in a space where they don't have basic human rights. And then they're also doing their best that they can to put out a product that is the best that they can. I think that it's tough because, like I said, there's so many different approaches to it. And you can say, like, for instance, like with the recycled plastic, like some people are saying, oh, well, you're getting plastic out of, the trash and you're, turning it into something new. But then there's the microplastics. Or then some people are talking about, well, it's still literally oil that you're putting on your body. How does that affect your health? And I've noticed, because I have super sensitive skin, this is like random, but I have super sensitive skin, and I've noticed that, like, when I was growing up, I feel like not many people talked about skin issues as much as they are now. I see it all the time, commercials, products, all types of things. And so I don't know if that's because of what we're putting on our body and the fact that you have like polyester sheets and polyester clothes. You're essentially sleeping and living all day long in plastic or oil and all of that. I don't know if there's a correlation there, but that's something I've been thinking about. But anyways, I think that, when I look at brands and I look at companies, I look at what they're putting out into the world, and I look at their reasoning behind what they're doing and what they're saying. And if they're making a claim that's just sort of like the low hanging fruit type of thing, like they're not necessarily doing something that's really going to move the industry forward. They're not really putting out a product that really they truly thought about all the things, or whatever it is that their focus is as a company, whatever sustainability goals or whatever that they're focused on. They're just sort of like picking the low hanging fruit and saying, here's a sustainable product, here's a sustainable collection. I don't consider that's not really hitting the mark for me.
Yes.
I like to see brands and companies that are actually doing more than just talking about it, and doing more than just putting out some random collection, but then don't think about all this other stuff that we're putting out to the world, you know? So I think it's challenging, and you just have to like, it's almost like picking the lesser of two evils type of thing. But yeah, anyway, that's how
that made me think of Whitney as well, kind of as a journalist in this arena. You must get some interesting pitches come your way of what is sustainable.
That's a nice way of putting it.
This is my diplomatic hat on. Feel free to take it off at any time. Yeah, because we have a little bit come our way, and we don't, you know, we're not a sustainable company first and foremost, but I get sent things which I find interesting, and I just I wanted to kind of get your viewpoint on how you cover sustainability from brands, you know, because as Brittany was saying, you've got to do due diligence, and kind of a brand not being greenwashing, you'd see, you know, you look into it, the statistics and the percentages and all of this, the hardcore facts. So I'm sure that governs what you write. So I'm just curious how you kind of, where your kind of topics of writing comes from, and who, when you get pitches, how do you address that? Who to take on and who not to, and how to?
Yeah,
it's delicate.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the first thing I would say is like, I at this point I would not describe any product as like sustainable. And I probably wouldn't describe a brand as sustainable. I will put it in quotes. I'll say like, or I'll say sustainability focused or sustainability centric. But I just don't think that communicates. I think when we're saying that, a lot of times what we're meaning is this is a brand that talks about this a lot, or that maybe even like cares about this a lot. But I mean, we know the most sustainable thing would be to not make new clothing, right?
Yes.
Like the number of people that have reached out to me and said, hey, I want to, you know, I'm making merch and I want to figure out what the most sustainable merch is. And like, I can point them towards places that make blank t-shirts and whatever in a better way. But ultimately, I'm always going to say, like, if it was me, I wouldn't do it unless I could do it from upcycling. Like, I wouldn't do it unless I could do it from secondhand clothing. So that's just sort of the first caveat, is like, I don't really, at this point, I wouldn't describe most products or brands as sustainable. That's just not, I don't know that that's that helpful. I think it's more helpful to talk about like, what are they actually doing? What are they actually focusing on? If they're saying we're a sustainable brand because we're using recycled nylon or because we're upcycling, let's talk about what they're actually doing. Like, let's let that word be an invitation to talk about a set of practices rather than letting that word just sort of be a pass to say like, we're doing this and now we don't have to talk about it anymore. I guess the other thing from a journalist perspective, in terms of like all the pitches I get, because I do get like, you know, it can be like 300 emails a day of
wow,
PR pitches. And so there is a lot of sorting that goes through of like things that, you know, what do you pay attention to and what do you not? And I think some of it for me is knowing how to ask good questions now. Like I've been just immersed in this long enough that I, you know, if someone makes a claim to me about this is sustainable, or, you know, we're using sustainable nylon, well, that's an interesting claim. And I'm going to want to ask more questions about what does that mean? Is that you talking about using recycled materials? What's the, you know, what are sort of the microplastics impacts? How is the brand thinking about that? So there's a lot of trying to get past the sort of slogans, right? To actually like, what are the practices? What are we actually doing? Like, what proof can you show me of what you're doing? Because just saying like, we did this one thing and it's a sustainable thing is usually not enough. And even some of the certifications out there, you know, there's sort of different weight, at least for me, that, you know, certain certifications I'll look at and be like, I know that doesn't really mean anything versus, you know, this other one that I might say like, oh, that actually like has a little bit more weight for me. And some of that just comes from wading through all of the information for a really long time. But yeah, I guess the main thing that I would want to underscore is just treating sustainability as an invitation to list specific practices and materials rather than sort of being a label that's used to obscure those things.
Ayesha, you are nodding your head like crazy there. I want to hear your thoughts on this as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think nodding my head because, you know, we've all in some ways started to see, look, no one regulates, there aren't any laws around, anyone can slap a sustainability label now. And so in some ways, the conversation has been co-opted, right? From citizens wanting to better understand or spend their hard-earned dollars towards something sustainable to, well, all of a sudden everything is sustainable. And I think a lot of the themes that Brittany and Whitney were focused on, we see as well. You know, one is just the intersectionality. Let's have this conversation around human rights and environment side by side, because you can't have one without the other. I think often companies will speak more to some of the environmental initiatives because those are cost saving versus, you know, you look through and thumb through a sustainability report, likely 60, 90 pages, you might see 2 pages on the human rights side. Why? Because it actually costs money to pay people more. So I think the intersectionality for us is often the key. You know, second is, you know, is this an initiative or is this actually core to your business? And I think that's really very telling, you know, because if it's a conscious collection here or there, but not core to your business, then you're really tinkering on the edges. But, you know, something that Brittany said about core peeling an onion is really important. Yes. We had these, you know, usually what we see when we are scoring brands is the smaller, locally sourced. I mean, there is a connection to, look, if you have control over your supply chain and you're simply not putting that much product volume out there, it's much easier to be sustainable. It turns out if you're trying to retrofit sustainability into a very fragmented, far-flung supply chain, it's very difficult because you really don't have any control, and your business model does the opposite of what your sustainability aspirations are. But, you know, in light of the long overdue conversation around diversity and inclusion in the fashion industry, last year within our sustainability index, we added a D&I metric and started to look at, well, all these brands who are talking about it, well, let's look under the hood. You know, how many people of color, how many Black people do they actually have at a board level, at a management level, but also, you know, across the organization. And it turns out that even some of the sustainably marketed and beloved sustainability leaders in the space score really badly on the D&I side. So, you know, much as Brittany said, this sort of onion of peeling and peeling, it's like, well, you know, sustainable for what? Animal rights, gender justice, you know, human rights, thinking about diversity and inclusion. But we really look at all of these issues in a connected way and a holistic way.
How do you think you can be a good conscious consumer? Because it's like Brittany said earlier, when she started, she kind of didn't want to fall into this, and you did fall into this and you were learning. I'm learning all of this. Like, it's hard for me to ask you guys questions because I'm just listening so hard to what you're saying, and it's such an education. I think that's the only way things really can move along, when you get actually to listen from the experts as yourselves and get that education, which, you know, hopefully all the FIT students get to see this and get to really listen and understand as they're going to be coming out into their future careers as designers, and pay attention to, you know, the quality and the, you know, the labor force and the fabrics that are used, the upcycling. But what makes a conscious consumer?
Yeah. You know, I don't like that word, not to derail your question, but, you know,
what word would you then help me understand then?
I would call our community more a community of concerned citizens. You know, I really think of us as citizens first and consumers later. Like, this notion that we are consuming our way into a sustainable fashion future. You know, one of my wonderful colleagues, Elizabeth Klein, who's written a book, Overdressed, talked a lot about this around, you know, in the last 10, 15 years, in some ways, the sustainability conversation has also been co-opted to say that somehow these wicked endemic issues within the fashion system are going to be fixed through consumption habits. And it turns out that there's a reason why it's so confusing to you, or why we haven't made much of a dent, because it's actually quite impossible, right? If you can curate the most beautiful capsule collection, spend the money to buy only from sustainable brands or upcycle, secondhand, thrift, rental, wonderful. If that makes you feel good about your choices, much like your vegan diet, that's wonderful. But if we are to actually address the carbon impact of the industry or the human rights impact, then we have to pass good, smart regulation, which is why you know, one of the biggest pieces of remake work is really around advocacy. We are very focused on getting the Garment Worker Protection Act passed here in California. We're watching the human rights due diligence coming out of Germany and other countries very closely. And so for an everyday person who says, I love fashion and I want to make a difference, our ambassador community, our ways of bringing people into the fold is to teach them to be citizens first and consumers later. We certainly saw this in the pandemic with our grassroots organizers demanding, you know, taking over Instagram and firing off tweets and signing our petition and demanding from brands that they have to honor contracts. And we were able to get 25 brands in line to say, yes, I'm going to pay up for the orders that I canceled in the pandemic. The number of women that we assured were paid through that, you know, that is impact at a completely different level and all the ways that I love to build a beautiful, sustainable wardrobe. So I'd say this myth that the industry has fed us is also in a way to push more product, right? And to Whitney's point, you know, no matter how sustainable, at the end of the day, it's still a consumption-based mindset. And if we were to change that, and especially for future designers, well, how do we keep clothes in generation longer? How do we think of fashion as something that is more a service than a good? To me, that is the more interesting conversation.
Yes. And it's like, I can't remember if Whitney said it or you say, Ayesha, to make less, like to make less in a collection, to not have this mass consumption, too much choices. And I think what I learned when I started Mission 6 years ago, I was self-funding the whole thing, and I used to be a fashion editor, a stylist. So I would shop for brands, for clients, whatever. And so I stopped shopping completely because I'm focusing on this and my money. And I didn't miss it at all. Didn't miss it at all. But when I did go out the odd occasion when I was allowed away from my desk, and I'd wander around Soho in New York, you go into the shops and you think, well, and it made me understand people's different level of income when it comes to shopping. Because I wasn't getting a lot of money, and well, what do you buy if you don't have much money? And you know, in the past, people had told me other luxury brands that are pertaining to be sustainable, but the price point is extremely high. So it's really difficult, I think, I found, to try and be a good citizen and a good consumer by buying things that have you know where that garment's come from. You know that it's come from a decent factory where people are getting a good wage and in safe working conditions. And I actually, Brittany, where do you tune in most? To sustainability activism or the fashion industry? Because I love when she talks. You're so passionate about what you do.
Yeah, actually, I wanted to tag on to the last question a bit, because I feel I get this question a lot on the forum. And what I love about the conference and the Sustainable Fashion Forum is that, you know, there's a lot of conferences out there, but a lot of them are business to business. And what I love about the Sustainable Fashion Forum is that it's very consumer driven. So it's very much, you know, regular people who just want to learn, want to do better, much like how I was when I first started. And, you know, I post things all the time about shopping sustainably and shopping and shopping and shopping. And I think that, but I also try to talk about the other ways that you can be sustainable that we don't talk about a lot. And sometimes I think that like gets overlooked, but I think it's really important. Like for me, you know, I am the founder of a sustainable fashion conference, right? And I am looked at as someone who's in the industry as, you know, as I was saying before, like as an expert, I guess, in this space, right? But I don't shop a lot of the brands that I talk about. You know, I don't shop at all, actually, to be completely honest. That kind of what you were saying about, you know, as an entrepreneur building something, everything that I have goes back into this platform. So first of all, I don't shop. But when I do shop, I don't beat myself over the head about where I shop because of my like ability to, if that makes sense. I think I said that weird. My budget is not very big when it comes to clothes. And I'm not shopping, you know, natural fabrics and fibers and, you know, this brand and this designer and this person. I'm going where I can get what I need, and I can get what I need. But when I do shop, I make sure that everything that I like, first of all, there are some places that I'm just not shopping regardless. Like a Fast or Forever 21, I'm not going there regardless. I don't care. My budget, whatever, I'm not going there. But when I do shop and when I do buy things, I make sure that whatever it is something that I'm going to wear the heck out of. It's something that I'm going to keep in my wardrobe. It's something that, you know, goes along with the other things in my closet. And that's how I approach shopping. That's how I approach being in this space, being this leader, but then like, you know, not having the budget to shop with some of the brands I talk about. It's not necessarily about, I think it's more important that you buy things that you're going to wear. And it's more important that you buy things that, you know, you'll get a lot of use out of, instead of beating yourself over the head about not shopping certain brands or not shopping certain materials and all of that. And I think that that kind of goes back to what Elizabeth was talking about when she was saying that, you know, she no longer calls herself a conscious consumer, and that I can't remember, I think it was Old Navy in the Atmos article that she talked about, she got pajamas from Old Navy and she wasn't going to bang herself over the head about that because it's not technically a sustainable brand. And, you know, it also goes back to what Ayesha was talking about, you know, there's this like struggle of like, is it the consumer's job to make the world sustainable, or is it the brand's job to make the world sustainable? It's going back and forth between the two. And I think that as a consumer, you know, or as just a regular everyday person or citizen, you know, you have to think about your budget, your lifestyle, what you have going on, and then you have to think, what are the values or the things that are important to me? So going back to what I was talking about with that onion, you know, what layers of that onion are non-negotiable for you? Like if you don't do animal-based things, or, you know, maybe like for me in sensitive skin, like maybe I do need to start focusing on materials and whatnot, but you pick what's important to you, and then that's what you focus on, and that's what you spend your time on, and you don't bang yourself over the head because you can't do it all. You know, you focus on that thing, and then when you're able to do more, you add more in and you add more in. And that to me is more sustainable than, you know, saving up all of your money to buy this one sustainable thing. But then it's like, well, I have a job interview now and now I don't have money to like get, you know what I mean? Like, I think it's just important to think about your lifestyle, you know, and like I said, what you've got going on, your closet, your budget and everything, and what's important to you, and then make decisions based on that rather than trying to do it right. What's that? I think there's that saying of like, we don't need, what is it, 10 people doing sustainability right? We need everyone trying. I don't know the quote. Dang, I wish I knew
it. Right? And not being overwhelmed by perfect. Like, don't let perfect be the enemy of good, maybe.
Yeah, there you go. But it's like, you know, and I see this also with brands, like not to like jump into like a different conversation, but I see this a lot with brands with trying to get them to speak at the conference. And like right now, I'm gonna be 100% honest with you. Like I'm a little frustrated with the brand right now because, you know, I feel like there's that whole, like, if we're going to join the conversation of sustainability, if we're going to talk about anything, it has to be right. We have to have everything figured out. We have to do it completely. Like, we don't want any error, anything. And I think it's so much more powerful for brands to say, this is where we are. We don't have it all figured out. We're trying to figure out, and this is where we're going. Come along with us on this journey. Let's have this open conversation about where we're going and what we're trying to do, rather than putting out like these perfect marketing messages, these perfect PR pitches, this perfect conversation. I think people want authenticity, you know, they want the real. And so, you know, for, like I said, going on tangent now, but for, you know, consumers, everyday people, citizens, you know, you don't have to be perfect to be a part of this space. You don't have to be perfect to, you know, to incorporate sustainability into your life. And for brands, you don't have to be perfect in order to join the conversation. I think that's not the approach, I think, because nobody has all the answers. None of us, even people who've been in this industry for a long time, you know, there's holes to everything. There's layers to everything. And so I think we all just need to stop being so like, you know, hard on each other and everyone about this, and actually come together and figure out what we can do and where people are, you know, making positive changes. And okay, let's do more of that. And okay, let's do more of that. Let's all adapt this and move this together, instead of trying to be like, oh, I only shop at those brands. Oh, you don't? Well, but meanwhile, your bank account is on zero and you can't buy food because, you know what I mean? Or you're talking about sustainable brands and beating people over the head about sustainability on Instagram, but you don't even live like that. You just went to Target or you just went to H&M, like, you know, which I see that too. So it's like, come on, guys, let's stop doing that.
Yes. Whitney, do you get asked a constant question about sustainability from your readers or your peers? Is there one thing that keeps coming back to you that they want to be educated on?
I mean, I also get this question a lot of like, basically like, what can I do? Or
yes,
I've often gotten questions that are essentially like, who are the good guys and who are the bad guys? Because, and I get it. It's like, not everyone is going to do this as a full-time job. Like, I don't expect everyone to have the sort of level of expertise that I do. Like, I get paid to do this. There's a reason that I know a lot about it, right? And I don't think everyone should have to know as much as someone who does it for their living in order to be. So I get the desire to sort of like break it down into a binary for me, but it's usually not quite that simple. And I guess the other thing, going back to the sort of like conscious consumer question, is that even just like using the word consumer, they've done studies on this, even just using the word consumer changes how we act after we hear it or read it. And it basically, I mean, I should be careful to like I don't want to make up figures, but essentially like we become more selfish and we start acting in a more self-centered way when we are framing ourselves as consumers. So I think at this point, a lot of my followers on like social media and stuff have been following me long enough that they know that's not what I'm there for anymore. There was a time when I did that all the time, when I'd be like, shop here, not there. And, you know, I'll still, if people want suggestions, I will still, you know, engage with some of that stuff. But increasingly I also like, I don't shop that much. And when I do, it tends to be secondhand. But even that, it's like, that's not if our imaginations are so limited that we can't imagine ourselves as anything other than consumers, we can't imagine any way out of this except through the sort of like very broken capitalist systems that got us here, we're just in a mess. So I think it's really trying to invite a different kind of conversation. And for me, sometimes as a journalist, that means like not letting the brands dictate the narrative. So even you're talking about what are the kinds of like PR pitches I get. And that's not to say I don't work with brands or that like brands are always the bad guy, but I think it is very important to notice like the ones shaping the narratives are usually the ones who have the money for a PR budget and to have someone who can be pinging journalists like me constantly to say like, here's a story, pay attention. But that doesn't mean that that's actually who we should be listening to most or who should be shaping the story, right? Like there are, you know, a lot of the garment workers that Ayesha works with all the time. Like those are the people who are actually making the stuff of this industry. Those are the hands that this stuff is passing through. So if we're only letting our narrative be driven by those who have sort of the capital to shape that narrative, I think we get off course. So I don't know, I feel like a lot of what I've been trying to do in recent years is taking some of the questions I get that, especially when they're from sort of a like Western reader, Western mindset, which is a lot of who I'm writing for, because that's me as well. Like trying to change that narrative a little bit and say like, this isn't all about me and my, you know, wanting to sort of be able to wash my hands of this and say, well, I didn't participate in this brokenness of this system. And instead looking at like, how can we actually move away from that towards a different imagination of this thing? Because I think it's going to take radical imagination to imagine our way into a different future for this industry.
Can I ask, are you all on the West Coast?
No, I'm on the West Coast. I guess
just Ayesha.
I'm in New York.
So Whitney's in New York. Because I was just curious listening to, I know that, and Brittany, you're in Portland, right? Yeah, so you both were on, because do you think it's more, people are more conscious on the West Coast because you're around nature more? Because a lot of, when we were just, and I tell you why I say this, when we were talking about doing a sustainable shoot, I think it was last year, we had trouble kind of connecting to brands on the East Coast, but there was a lot more on the West Coast and in the UK that were more I'm cautious of my words now, sustainable, like kind of trying to be more sustainable and do better practices. And I just was curious if that's where you're located as well, or where people are located has an impact on having that education and having those tools available to them.
I think that for me, like in starting the conference,
I mean,
I don't know.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think that for me in starting the conference in Portland was helpful because Portland is such a green eco sort of hub where everyone is into that. And, you know, we have bike lanes everywhere, but we actually probably should just have regular lanes, to be honest, but whatever. But yeah, it's definitely that sort of place here. So I think that, you know, doing that first conference and getting the response that I did, I think that being here helped that, especially since it was 5-6 years ago when it wasn't talked about as much as it is now. But that's just, yeah. So for me, I think so. Maybe potentially.
Yes. Ayesha, what? Sorry.
Myth perhaps that, you know, there is this West Coast sensibility. You know, obviously there is sort of more nature in California, but you know, we also have the largest sweatshop environment right here in California. So I think it's to say a lot of things are just, if it's hidden from your consciousness, it's hard to build that empathy or to care. And you know, I will have people who very much care about sustainable materials in their clothes, or perhaps natural dyes because you're worried about endocrine disruptors or what the impact is on your skin. But that sort of interest in sustainability in some ways is quite south to me or to my environment. And that's very different from, it's a predominantly Latinx community that's making clothes for less as well. So, you know, can California be a sustainable fashion capital of frontier? Perhaps, but you know, we have to have that intersectional conversation of, well, are we really going to have sweatshops and then pretend to have a lot of sustainable branding? You know, New York is also interesting in terms of, you know, like all the garbage gets dumped in Staten Island, and sort of who are the communities that are thinking about who are the direct recipients of our bad environmental and human rights behavior. You know, and I think of this also in a sort of North global South conversation, because so much of all the extraction and dumping happens in countries that are simply not consuming at the rate that other countries are, you know. So you've got the markets in Ghana that are essentially decimated from all the secondhand clothes, in many ways landfill that we ship over there. Or you've got the women in Bangladesh who are working in subhuman conditions, but also on the front lines of climate impacts. And in some ways you might say, well, there's more of a sustainability consciousness there because climate change is there here and now. And, you know, from what you can buy and that ethos and how long you make things last, it's fundamentally different. I mean, even with fast fashion, if you hand wash it and line dry it, and I'm not saying we can do that in our New York, San Francisco apartments, it will last longer, but you're going to wash something on high heat, you know, in a dryer, and it is going to fall apart. So I think there is sort of consciousness, you know, across the board, depending on how you relate to these issues or what your inlay is. The beauty of fashion is whether you're an animal lover, a planet lover, or a human rights person, as I am, you know, there are different entryways for us to say, but this is all of our collective fight, and how can we make a difference? And, you know, I'd say for people listening, and it is easy to get overwhelmed when you're trying to curate that perfect wardrobe. And that's really why our ambassador community, we think of doing that hand-holding, building a nurturing, kind community to say, let's try and take the little steps that we can together, you know. So every summer we do a no new clothes pledge, and it's amazing how 90 days of buying nothing can just be a reset moment of, you know, unsubscribing from all of the ads and the fast fashion things hitting your inbox and just saying, taking stock of what you have. I also think about in the pandemic, how much we've done with very little, you know, maybe outside of buying sweatpants or tops, we're not buying very much and we've been quite fine. And so what can we take as learnings from really, this is us coming up against ecological boundaries, right? This will not be the only pandemic of our lifetime, perhaps, or climate event, to realize that this culture of constant consumption and disposability is really bringing us up against the limits of us being extinct as a human race, you know, not to make it that scary, but in some ways it is.
Gosh, yes. That is, it is quite
I'm a
scary.
joy, aren't I, at parties? This is why I don't have any because people are like, oh no, it's that lady, the scary one.
No, but that
sky is falling.
No, but it's so interesting. Like you know, we've all been in. Well, I've been in London. I'm normally in New York, but I've been in London. I keep coming back home and seem to be getting stuck in lockdowns. Like since November, I've been here. But I think everyone's realised because of the COVID, that how much do you really need? You know, do you really need to buy this stuff? And I have to have this. And actually, I was listening to earlier today, Stella McCartney did a Zoom. She presented the collection online and then did a Zoom meeting afterwards and talking about a new product they've been working with. I think it's bulk thread, and there's a new mushroom fiber that could replace leather. She was talking about, which I think is really incredible and fascinating. And she says it's biodegradable and there's less impact on the environment. And it's exciting to kind of see if this is where science is taking us, to be less pollutant. And I'd love to know, Whitney, what are some of the sustainable people, like in the industry, fashion, that you look up to, that you feel that you because you're so knowledgeable about all of this, all three of you are, is there, like, who do you look up to that kind of you still get inspired from?
Yeah, I mean, there's a ton of people that I learn from. There are people that I learn from all the time. I think I'm much more hesitant at this point in my career to put anyone on a pedestal, because people are people and people make mistakes. And so that would be true of anyone that I could say that I admire. But I think some of the people that I've been learning from most recently, I mean, Liz Rickett at the OR Foundation is,
yes, she's amazing,
a wealth of knowledge. I mean, we first met on a trip to a landfill that was through the Slow Factory, which is Celine Saman, who I also learn a ton from. So Liz is someone that I've been learning a lot from. Rebecca Burgess at Fibershed is another person that just, I feel like every time I talk to her, there's something that I'm like, I need to go write that down. They're involved in regional fiber systems that they've been trying to build, and also doing a lot around regenerative ag and carbon farming. And I think like you, I was on the Stella Zoom this morning, and I'm kind of a fungi nerd anyway, even apart from fashion. I just have gotten like very into mushrooms, just even like conceptually in the past year or so. So I've been excited to see all of that stuff around mycelium based materials like Milo. But I also think there's something about like what Fibershed is doing, which is science forward, is paying attention to the data, but it's also refusing to like look at tech as sort of a savior that's just going to get us out of all of our problems. And it's really saying like, we have the tools. We have the tools, we have the knowledge, we have the skills to fix a lot of these problems. And a lot of them actually look a lot more like what people did a few hundred years ago than they look like, our vision of some futuristic world where we're all taking trips to the moon for vacation or whatever. And it's trying to actually connect with the people and the communities who have actually been taking care of the planet in a way that is truly sustainable and truly circular, if we want to use that language, although that's very like emerged from white Western sort of communities. And a lot of the people who have been doing this well haven't been from those communities. So a lot of what I feel like I've encountered through organizations like Fibershed has been like, hey, we need to actually look at the indigenous communities that have stewarded this land well for thousands of years. And like, how do we actually learn from and look to those people as leaders, and not just sort of like steal their ideas and then run away and gatekeep with it, but actually like turn towards that as leadership and say, how can we learn from that? Because this was working before sort of settler and colonizer communities came to this land or other lands and sort of changed the way that we interacted with the other beings around us. So those are some of the places that I guess I've been.
Yes. Brittany, is there anyone that you've kind of mentored you, or someone that you have admired that you think inspires you? And
honestly, like, I can't really pinpoint one specific person. I think that, I don't know, my answer may be a little different, but this has been really hard.
Yes.
Platform has been really, really hard. And especially in the pandemic, it's been a really big challenge. And I think the people who support me and have supported me and continue to support me, like Whitney and Ayesha both have been very supportive in growing the Sustainable Fashion Forum and building it. And I think not that is, I don't know, it's inspiration in a different way, you know, and like not inspiration as far as like ideas and inspiration as far as like, oh, that's something cool that's moving the industry forward. It's just inspiration to like keep going, you know?
Yes.
I think that is sort of where my mind goes with that question, is just the folks who, you know, I think of even Eileen Fisher Renew, like when I first did my conference, no one knew me from Adam. Like no one had ever heard of my name, nothing, but they came down and participated in my first conference, you know, even like Whitney also like didn't know me from Adam, and she came and participated in the second one, I think it was. And then from there on, you know, and Ayesha has spoken at so many of my events and is speaking at this next, you know, event next month. And I think that for me, where I am right now with my headspace and just, you know, the stuff that I'm going through personally and professionally and all of that, my inspiration is coming from, you know, seeing that people actually believe that I can do this, and that and think that what I'm doing is helpful. And our community as well is really inspiring for me. So that's what I'm having to fall back on right now during this really hard time, is just you know, being inspired and seeing the great work that other people are doing as well. And you know, just.
Brittany, if we didn't have people like you, we'd be in, and Ayesha and Whitney, we'd be in such a mess, you know, so you have to keep doing what you're doing. Just think, this is going to the younger generation of FIT. So you guys are helping them think more about what they're going to do and how they're going to build their companies when they leave school, when they graduate.
And that thing too is like, it's crazy because I get so many emails from students that are in college and doing projects and papers and all of this, wanting to interview me and interview, you know, our team. And that is like, it's still kind of like, really me? But but that is really, like I said, like that, I think that is honestly the thing that, you know, we talked before we started this about sort of the challenges of right now. And that is truly what is keeping me going. And that truly is what is inspiring me is, you know, the people and just the potential that what I'm doing could help someone or encourage someone or motivate someone or even help someone with their career if they're like speaking at the conference or something like that. That's what's keeping me going.
But it's also, it's the younger generation, the students that are reaching out to you, and you're helping this move forward. You're creating the future because you're giving them that.
Someone said that to me and I was like, I think it's because, you know, like I said, I started from like an outsider in this space. And so sometimes I still see myself as that. And that's not what I need to stop doing. That it's bad habit.
Yes.
But yeah, someone did say that to me, and it blows my mind. But
I think that's the thing, Brittany. It's like, I think all of us in this space were outside. I mean, I don't know how you felt, Ayesha, but like
completely. You know, we're here and we're unapologetic, but I would say that there's also kindness and a support system. And for people who are interested in, you know, being a part of the sustainable, like all of our careers have also been so zigzagged. You know, I think for students listening in to know there is no magic formula of how do I make a career in sustainability and fashion.
And being an outsider can be a real asset in this, because it's like we all saw something a little different than we probably would have if we were like, I wasn't trained as a journalist. I wasn't trained in sustainability. I didn't have training for any of this. When I started writing about this, I didn't know that I wasn't expecting to become everything I was writing about, I was learning from other people. So I thought, well, there are clearly people who know more than me about this.
And it was just when we're those people and you're like, what? You know?
Yeah. And I think it was shocking to me to have people then start looking to me, as I think you've felt, Brittany. But I think that's the thing that I would want to say. Like, if you're coming from an outsider perspective, there's a lot of, that's a gift that you can bring of being like, hey, I see things a little different because I haven't actually been in that space to let that space sort of shape my brain. So I'm just like, here's what it looks like from out here. And I think as more and more of us are coming into that, like we're creating a new inside. And then there are going to be people who come through and disrupt some of the things that we're doing and are like, hey, you're not seeing this really obvious thing. And I'm going to be like, oh my God, I mean, I hope I respond with grace and say, oh my goodness, you're right. Please fix what I've been doing wrong. But I think that's the thing with so many of the sort of legends in the sustainability space at this point, like people who are way further down the road than me, that like they all felt like sort of outsiders when they started, because they were like, they created something, they created a new path by trying to do something that other people weren't doing yet. And it's so valuable.
You know what someone said to me when I started doing this, and apart from most of my friends thought I was insane because I really jumped off a cliff with not knowing how do I launch a charity and a media platform, interactive, blah, blah, blah. And when I've been like Brittany sometimes, when I've been really kind of thinking, oh my gosh, what am I doing? How can I keep doing it? If it was easy, it would have all been done before.
Absolutely.
And you have to remember, I always remember that and think, well, if you didn't do this, ladies, what else would you be doing? Like, I don't know what else I would do if I wasn't doing this. And it's, when I was kind of researching all of this, I was looking at your forum, Brittany, and you're kind of given a platform, a vehicle for voices. You know, that's how it has to start. It starts with a conversation, and it starts with, I think, educating. I want to learn more about, I know we've only doing this for an hour, but I'd love, I want to do more of these, because I know for sure I have so much to learn about sustainability and better practices and sweatshops and labor forces and conditioning and labor conditions, and the human rights element that comes into this that is overlooked. And I think once you start to open your eyes, and you guys are showing us the way with all of this, and FIT students, you've got to listen to this and get your notepads out and take notes on all of this, because the planet's in trouble, and it's that generation and a generation afterwards that are going to be impacted by all of this. But thanks to Ayesha, Whitney and Brittany, making these changes and doing it now with such incredible, like, your hearts are in it. I can tell. It's so lovely to hear you passionately talk about all of this. Whitney, where do you see this? Like, what would be your ideal in the next couple of years on how it's going to move?
Oh gosh. I mean, I think the industry needs to have some really serious conversations about growth. Right now, we just treat growth as an obvious good. If something's growing, it's a sign it's good. And that's really hard to reconsider, especially as a business. But I don't see a way out unless we can reconsider that. Even if we're using the most sustainable materials in the world, we're not going to fix this problem if we continue sort of seeing expansion as the only way forward. So that feels like one of the questions that the business side of things in particular, like, doesn't know how to have, even if they sort of like give a nod to it, the actual thought of like, what if we were not trying to grow? What if we really treated being smaller and being more local and being, really rooted in community rather than trying to be the biggest thing that touches everything? I think without that, we're not really gonna move forward. I think one of the other things that this sort of sustainability space needs to have more of a conversation about is synthetics. And, Brittany was sort of referencing the personal health impacts of that. And it gets talked about. We talk about microplastics, but I don't think we're really grappling with the actual ramifications of what comes from microplastics. I mean, I'm still sort of trying to figure out some of that in my own life, and my own reporting. But I was in a conference recently, sometime in the last year, that was talking about it's more helpful to think of microplastics in the ocean as like plastic smog. That's actually a better sort of visualization. We tend to think of it as like, oh, little pieces of plastic, but it's like we're literally changing the sort of like airscape, if there were such a thing, of the ocean. And we're all, it's in everything now. It's in our food, it's in the air. You're ingesting a credit card's worth of plastic every week. And a lot of that is from our clothing and our fibers. So those are some things that feel like we need to be sort of thinking about. And I think the other thing that feels really clear, this feels like it's happening now. It doesn't even feel like we need to wait 5 years for this, but having a really serious conversation about agriculture and how we do it whether we want to call it regenerative or we want to call it carbon farming or we want to just call it, none of those things. I just interviewed Chris Newman of Sylvan Aqua Farms for a story that I'm working on. He's not necessarily in the fashion world, but if you have any interest, anyone watching this, if you have any interest in learning about ag, he's another great person to talk to. And he wouldn't use any of that language to talk about it. But what's very clear is that our agriculture systems are broken. And if we're not making clothing out of synthetics, then we are making it out of agricultural products, and seeing the connections between agriculture and fashion feels very crucial for me in terms of addressing the climate crisis and other environmental crises that we've created.
Ayesha, where do you see Remake in a couple of years? What would be what's your goal?
I was still sitting a little bit with your question of sort of who I admire in this space, and in some ways, that really is the genesis of Remake. We wanted to create this welcoming, inclusive community of lovers of fashion that are here being a part of the change. And as I reflect on that, someone who I really admire who's actually giving the FIT Changemaker Awards is Amber Valletta, and we have been so grateful to Amber for, with humility and kindness, lifting our campaigns this last year during the pandemic. A model of her stature didn't have to do that.
Yes.
To write legislative letters to, the Senate committee here in California to support our pay up work. And so, as I look to people like her, I'm like, fashion is this interesting industry that you've got celebrities with profiles, and you've got incredible models and people who market as fashion who could be using their platform for good. And so I really think of it as fashion does so much to shape our culture, and that here we are, an intergenerational group of women sitting on different parts of the fashion value chain, really rising in solidarity to make this industry better. And so as I look to, Remake's path and where we need to go in the next 5 years, knowing we've just had our 5-year birthday, it really
congratulations.
Thank you. Like, how do we bring, more models and celebrities along to use their platform? How do we, through these sorts of education conversations, assure that the next generation of designers are asking the right questions? Because so much of what we're trying to grapple at the other end is a design mess, and if we are thinking of degrowth or thinking about truly sustainable materials, or is synthetics the right answer? So much of that starts with the design education. And over the last few years, we've just been so excited, at FIT and some of the other design schools, of these conversations starting to happen. So I really see that part of our education work growing. And lastly, I've just been really struck by the solidarity that we are seeing across workers, right? So when we were out there campaigning for garment workers in this pandemic, we had workers who work retail that were messaging us, DMing us on Instagram and saying, this is happening to me too. I've been furloughed, I'm not been paid, or I'm up against a racist manager, or, I'm a warehouse worker that's dealing with COVID conditions. And so you're starting to see that these inequities in the system that's working for very few, and really trickle-down economics doesn't work, that there is a generation and a movement of the labor movement coming back to the table to say, but the retail worker, warehouse worker, garment worker, we are essential to this industry. And this industry has made pandemic profit, outside pandemic, and yet we're all living below the poverty wage. And so putting wages back in the center of the conversation for us will be a big priority.
Yes. Brittany, I'm going to ask you the same question. Like, what would be your dream kind of to have your business in 5 years? What's your goal?
Yeah, hopefully it doesn't take 5 years to get there. But what I would really like to see, because since the Sustainable Fashion Forum isn't sponsored, what I would really like to see is meaningful partnerships between brands that actually have something to say, not just want to say anything, but have something to say, so that we can make the platform more accessible. As far as like our Instagram and all of that, like, of course that's accessible, but I think like when it comes to the conference, like we try to keep our price low, but it's still a barrier for some people with COVID and the pandemic. And I'd also like to really be able to support the people who support the conference, the speakers. So I would like to see, like some sort of, like I have some things in the works that I'm working on, but like partnerships in a way that allow us to to make sure that everyone has access to the information and to the conversations. And like I said, the speakers are supported as well. And then like another part.
So do you see it coming out of America? Like going around, having your forum in different countries?
I don't know. I haven't really thought about that. I think it'd be kind of, I don't know. I kind of had this like dream that that the conference would be like the South by Southwest of sustainability, where everybody sort of comes and we activate the local market, you know, as far as the designers and you know, restaurants and all of that here in town, and really support and to have all these different like things. Like, I don't know, that was just like something I thought about. But something else that I really would love to see, and this isn't really specific to the Sustainable Fashion Forum, it's more specific to like, I guess, brands and just how they approach the conversation. But I really hope that there's less emphasis on trying to be perfect when it comes to talking about this and moving in this space. And kind of what I was saying before is working together to actually make change. In a conversation that Ayesha did on the Sustainable Fashion Forum platform a while ago, I can't remember which one it was, but she said something about how we've known what the problems are for a long time. And we've been talking about these problems for a long time. And yet, you know, we still are having the same conversations. And I was noticing when I was putting together the conference this year, which is why our theme is Take Action, because I was noticing that the conversations that I was putting together are literally the conversations that I put together last year and the year before that and the year before that. It's like we're talking about the same things, and brands and people are saying we need to make change and we need to do this and we need to do that. But year after year, we're still talking about the same things. And, you know, and I think that it comes down to like people don't want to, they don't have all the answers, so they're not going to put their foot out there. And then also, you know, there are brands and people that, or I guess more brands that are picking at the low-hanging fruit instead of actually taking on, you know, massive something that's really going to make a change. So that's what I would like to see is, you know, a conference. I'd love for it to be able to support those who support it. And then I would love to see, as far as, you know, people who want to be in this space, instead of just a bunch of lip service or PR, you know, pitches and marketing and pretty pictures and all of that, that there's, you know, that we're actually trying to achieve something, and that next year we're not having some of the same conversations that we had next year or this year, or, you know, any of the years really. Pick one.
Yes. Oh, well, I think I'm going to say thank you, because I think we've gone over an hour, I think, which has been fantastic. It's been so great just listening to you all and hearing everything. And Whitney, Ayesha, and Brittany, thank you so much for being part of this FIT summit. Honestly, I could listen to this more. I'm getting such an education from the three of you. It's brilliant. It's really brilliant. And hats off to all of you. My God, if you can come through a year like that, anything is possible. Absolutely anything.
Absolutely. Thank you.
That's what I tell myself anyway.
Well, thank you so much for having us. It's been really fun to conversation with people and see your faces again.
Yeah, thank you.
Good to see everyone, and hopefully someday in person soon. But you know, it's wonderful to be here. And thank you to FIT for the opportunity.
Yes, thank you, FIT.